Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. My name is Kamal Malik. I'm a team member here at Sankofa, and I would like to welcome you from the bottom of my heart, all those tuning in online and also in person. This is going to be a very fruitful event today. So before we get started, I do want to give a few announcements of upcoming events that will be taking place at Sankofa within the next week or so. Feel free to always visit our website, sankofa.com, and you can just click on the events tab or simply scroll down and you can see the upcoming events. You can also see the previous events on our YouTube channel, and there's many links to the YouTube channel on the website. So sankofa.com is your one-stop shop. Also, check us out on Sankofa DC on all social media platforms if you want to stay abreast of what's going on here at Sankofa. So, tomorrow not tomorrow. Actually, yes, it is tomorrow. Tomorrow, Friday, August 1st, we have an event, a book event called Ambitions and Keeping Up Appearances in the Making of a Doctor. It's going to be a discussion with author Dr. Samuel Kalibala, and he's going to be talking about the struggles of coming from Uganda and learning how to pay for medical school. It's very, very good discussion that's going to be tomorrow. So come out there, and for that, the time of that event is going to be 6:30 and to 8:30. So that's Friday, 6:30 to 8:30. On Saturday, we have a wonderful event. It is a yearly event, a festival of sorts called Watermelon Day. And it's a family-friendly day going to be taking place this Saturday, August 2nd, from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. And we've been doing it every year for over 5 years now. And it's a huge success. We give free watermelon all day. There's going to be a lot of events for children and young people, adults, storytelling. There's going to be musical performances, dances, fashion shows, and all type of stuff happening indoors and outdoors. And celebration of all things red, black, and green, like the colors of the watermelon with the black seeds. And that's what that celebration is for. So come on out and celebrate with us on Saturday for Watermelon Day. Also on August 3rd, Sunday, so we have events today, tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday. So on Sunday, we have an event called The Politics of Kenya, Colonial Kenya Discussion. So in this first installment of our Kenya series, Montat Ngugi, Ali Broadway, and Dr. Milton Nyakundi explore the lasting impact of British colonial rule, examining land, resistance, and the roots of the modern Kenyan state. So we're going to be doing a whole series on Kenya, and this is the one that starts it off. So we have plenty of events, many events, but I'll leave it there, and what I will do is just tell you about our wonderful guests that we have here tonight. We also have weekly events, like on Monday there's an event of painting your name in the Amharic Fido. You can learn how to write your name in Amharic alphabet, and that's on Mondays at 8. And then Tuesdays, every Tuesday at 8, we have a jam session hosted by Artivism, which is a great group of young people, young Howard grads and folks, artists in the DC community. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce today's event. This is a book launch, and the title of the book is Hubert Harrison, Forbidden Genius of Black Radicalism. So, about the event. Hubert Henry Harrison, the father of Harlem radicalism, blazed a trail for black organizers in the Socialist Party. His Liberty League of Negro Americans catalyzed the rise of Marcus Garvey and the latest and the largest international organization of African people in history. Harrison defended free love and free thinking, but because of his radicalism, the full scope of his visionary legacy has been erased from popular history and popular memory until now. Dr. Brian Kwoba is an associate professor of history and director of African and African American studies at the University of Memphis. Over the past 2 decades, Dr. Kwoba has been an activist on issues including anti-imperialism, immigrant workers' rights, climate justice, Palestine, decolonizing education, the movement for Black lives, Pan-Africanism, and more. His new book, Hubert Harrison, Forbidden Genius of Black Radicalism, published by UNC Press in June 2025, is an intellectual biography of one of history's most underappreciated political visionaries. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kwoba to the Sankofa stage. Thank you very much.
Greetings, everyone. So I'm not Dr. Kwoba. I'm Dr. Ichile, but what Dr. Kwoba has honored me with is the task of opening up the space, because Sankofa is a home place for me. I've been coming into this place consistently since I was 18 years old, and I'm way past 18. And because of this special house that the Grimas built and what it has meant as a revolutionary space, as a consistently life-affirming space, we must acknowledge that, and we must give honor to the ancestor we're going to be speaking about tonight, the ancestors whose words and knowledge are represented in this room, but we also always begin with a land acknowledgement, right? Okay, I'm gonna ask you something that seems strange. Raise your hand if you have hand sanitizer on you, with you today. Anybody? Okay, I have some in my purse. You'll understand why in a second. So we're gonna do a land acknowledgement and we're gonna pour libation. And I'm assuming some of us know what that means, but when we do important things on land, we want to acknowledge the original stewards of that land. Here we are on Nakochtank land, we are on Piscataway land, we're on the land of people whose names we will never know because they were pushed away and decimated. But part of that tradition is to acknowledge the four directions, north, south, east, and west. We present the water to the original stewards of this land, the original caretakers of the waterways of this land, and ask that this water is acceptable in their sight. This water that we're going to offer to our ancestors to refresh their journey, that they may be with us more intently, more intensely in this space. We say thank you. We say thank you to the original owners and caretakers of this land. So as you will hear, Dr. Kwoba is playing two very unique chimes. And the bell tones are interesting because they open up those top energy centers. The intellectual work we're supposed to do here is important, but we also have to do the wisdom work and the divine work and the creative work, so we're opening those up. One of those bell tones is a water tone and one is an earth tone. Dr. Kwoba is a water sign. Hubert Harrison is an earth sign. And so in my mind and in our thinking, these sounds together represent the song that these two individuals have been singing with one another. This book is an act of co-creation, right? As historians, we are co-creating, we are channeling, we are communing with ancestors and bringing their voices back into the world where they belong. And so that's what he is doing. That's what he has done, and that's what he is doing here today. So we can hear the song, read the song, and engage with the song. All right, libation. So in many of our traditions, including Hoodoo, including Isheshe, we usually take our shoes off to pour libation because we want to connect with the earth. Remember that we are now stewards of this land and we're connected with the ancestors buried in it. I'm not going to ask you all to take off your shoes. We're at various levels of comfort with that, but please, if you can, take your bare hand and touch and tap the earth. I'm going to pick up this rattle and I'm going to give us a rhythm, okay? The heartbeat is the first drum. Our bodies make all the other ones. And then we can collaborate with other elements in nature, like rattles and trees and animals, to create other drums. As I open up the space and call ancestors, community ancestors, bloodline ancestors, I want you to find a rhythm first. Tap the ground. You can tap with your foot. You can tap with your hand. Just find it. Once you find it, come on, tap with me. Don't be embarrassed. You can just squat down, lean forward. Our ancestors gave us these bodies. They gave us the fingernails, they gave us the hair texture, the skin tones. So we give them a little bit of our body energy back. We say welcome. We say thank you. We set our intention that all our words today that we are speaking and thinking are strong medicine for us and everybody else whose lives we touch after we leave this space today. We call our first ancestor. I'm gonna let Dr. Kwoba shout the name.
Hubert Harrison.
Hey, Ashe. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. This is a name we should begin to call more often, guys. That's why we're here today. Let's find that rhythm. And I want you to call the ancestors in your family bloodline whose names you know. Call them out loud. Give them your energy. Ashe. 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 It's a beautiful sound. Ashe.
Ashe.
We call those names of the ancestors who set examples. Come on, we can, it's a chorus. We call the name of the ancestors whose lives were of good character, who set good examples, who made all those hard decisions that led to us being here today. We say welcome and thank you. Ashe. Yes, yes, Ashe. We call the name of community ancestors whose light still guides us. Ashe, we call Malcolm X. Ashe, we call Harriet Tubman. Ashe. Y'all know the ones you always call in spaces like this. Call them, come on. Ashe. 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 That's a good one. Ashe. Ashe. Welcome. Mojuba, Mojuba, Mojuba. We say thank you. We show you our reverence. We show you our respect. We show you our gratitude. In the name of all that is honorable and holy within us, we say thank you. Ashe. For the ancestors whose names we don't know, but who walk with us anyway, we say welcome and Ashe. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Dr. Brian Kwoba.
Good evening, everyone. Hubert Harrison loved the harmonica, so that's one of the reasons that I have a harmonica here. I have some eyeglasses on the altar, my touchstone, my Africa stone, which never leaves home, by the way, but this is such an important moment, and I feel so honored to be in this space, this sacred space of Sankofa. I have a lot to share, so I'm going to try to just be brief and tell a couple stories, give you a feel for the book. But this is really, really special for me, so thank you for coming out and being a part of this moment. So, real quick, a little bit about me. This is a picture of me from way, way back in the day. I don't know if we can get the lights turned down maybe a little bit. It might help to see the screen. But yeah, my dad is from Kenya. My mom is from the United States, British heritage. And so questions of belonging, questions of identity, questions of what it means to be black, to be African American, to be Kenyan, to be African, are things that I've been sitting with for a very, very long time. This is my first ever protest, 2004. It was the 1-year anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And it was also a moment where the US had just backed the overthrow of President Aristide in Haiti for the second time. And I was a member of the International Socialist Organization, had just joined, and I was proud to hold this banner calling for the US to keep its hands off of Haiti. And for those who remember the times, there was this ludicrous album out, and there was a group of Bronx high school students, right? You can't really see them because of the banner, but there's this group of Bronx high schoolers right behind me, and they had the best chant because it was an election year, right? And George W. Bush was running for re-election, and so their chant was, "Move, Bush, get out the way. Get out the way, Bush, get out the way." I want to give a quick shout out to Jeff Perry. He is the first scholar to write book-length treatments of Hubert Harrison. He has a 2-volume biography. Raise your hand if any of you have read these or are aware of Jeff Perry. A few people, about half the room. Okay. Yeah, Perry laid an extraordinary foundation for the work that I did, and I really tried to build on and extend the richly detailed 2-volume work that he produced. Let me just keep going. So I'm going to talk about a couple different dimensions of Harrison's thinking and legacy and politics. He was a very multi-dimensional figure, as anybody who's looked at him will quickly realize. So I'm going to get into a couple of those dimensions and also say something about his erasure before we invite Dr. Jackson up to have some conversation and to have some conversation with you as well. So, Hubert Henry Harrison, born 1883 in the Caribbean island of St. Croix, what is now part of the U.S. Virgin Islands. He had some training in the Anglican Church and becomes orphaned as a teenager, which prompts him to move to the United States, as well as the fact that his sister Mary had already moved to Manhattan and was able to help him get established when he moves to New York in 1900. As you will know, I'm sure many people in this room know, this was part of a more general wave of Caribbean migration to the United States, where people were seeking better life prospects and job and educational opportunities. Now, one of the things that was shocking for Caribbeans who arrived in the U.S., particularly in New York, was the fact that in 1906, the Bronx Zoo literally placed a Congolese man named Otabenga in the monkey house section of the zoo. And I just feel like gives us so much context about the times that we're talking about, early 1900s. Meanwhile, this is happening in the Bronx. Right next door in Harlem, Hubert Harrison writes a diary entry, which is a pledge to Mother Africa. And he ends his pledge by basically identifying himself as an untamed, untamable African. And I just find that such a refreshing and contrasting position to take, right? Especially given that he was born in the Caribbean and is now living in the U.S. But this is a model, I think, for black folks throughout the diaspora in terms of how we might want to think about and reconnect with the continent as untamed, untamable Africans. There's a lot to say about Harrison's relationship to Africa and African people, and one of the ways I describe it in the book is radical humility, because here's a quote that I think really captures what Harrison felt. He said, "Instead of futile expectations from the doubtful generosity of white land grabbing, let us American Negroes go to Africa, live among the natives, and learn what they have to teach us, for they have much to teach us." This was upending a whole train of colonial thinking that predominated at the time, which is where people thought, you know, we need to go to Africa to civilize them, right? We need to go to Africa to Christianize them. We need to go to Africa to develop them. Of course, white colonizers had that view, but also some African Americans had that view. And so Harrison is basically just flipping that entire view on its head and saying, look, the task of us is not to teach Africans, not to colonize or civilize or Christianize them, but to learn what they have to teach us. Another thing that shocked Harrison and many Caribbean migrants was the Jim Crow segregation that they encountered in the early 20th century United States. Many people here will be familiar with, you know, racial segregation, disfranchisement, lynching. This really, really shocked Caribbeans, because in most of the Caribbean, you don't have the kind of violent white supremacist terrorism that lynching symbolized. Now, there were also some really amazing new things that Caribbeans like Harrison encountered, including Harlem, the culture of Harlem as it's becoming this black mecca, with African American migrants streaming in from the South to places like Harlem and Detroit and Chicago and Washington and other places, and also Caribbeans, right, as well. And so I'm just gonna give us a moment to kind of drop in to Harlem. Oh, sorry. So this last picture kind of captures what many people felt at the time, right? Which is that Harlem was this kind of mecca of the new Negro, right? A place where lots of African Americans and African Caribbeans and Africans were coming to forge a new community and a rich and vibrant community that becomes one of, if not the largest black community in the United States by 1930. So, one of the things that Harrison does when he gets to New York is he joins these debate lyceums, these debate clubs in black churches, and he very quickly breaks from religion. He writes a letter to his mentor, Francis Reynold Keyser, and he says, "I'm an agnostic, not a dogmatic disbeliever, nor a bumptious and narrow infidel. Agnosticism simply means that a man shall not say he knows or believes that which he has no scientific grounds for professing to know or believe." And this is part of his basically stepping into the free thought movement, which was a movement of secular sort of anti-religious thinkers. And here's an article Harrison writes for the main free thought magazine called The Truth Seeker. And as you can see from the title of the article, apart from Harrison getting a front page feature in a largely white free-thinking movement, he's decrying the fact that churches were we're not taxed, right? We're not paying taxes. And this speaks to the sort of larger demands of the free thought movement. Free thinkers at that time stood for free speech, free press, free mails, taxation of church property, as you saw in Harrison's article. They wanted chaplains out of the military. They wanted prayers out of school. They wanted Bible oaths out of the courtroom. Basically a complete separation of church and state. And of course, there's a number of European free thinkers, Mark Twain, Robert Ingersoll, there's a whole tradition there. But, like anything else, free thought and free thinking gets better and more interesting when you blacken it, right? Just like Marxism gets more interesting when you blacken it, feminism gets more interesting when you blacken it. Plain fish is not as good as blackened fish, right? So Harrison is a black freethinker. He says things like this: "It should seem that Negroes of all Americans would be found in the free thought fold, since they have suffered more than any other class of Americans from the dubious blessings of Christianity. Yet the church among the Negroes today exerts a more powerful influence than anything else in the sphere of ideas." Sounds kind of familiar, right? Sounds pretty contemporary, actually. "The church saw to it," wrote Harrison, "the religion taught to slaves should stress the servile virtues of subservience and content, and these things have bitten deeply into the souls of black folk." And this is an article, as you can tell from the title of the article, he's trying to explain why black communities are so conservative. And in his view, it's because Christianity still enslaves the minds of those whose bodies it has long held bound. Now, lest anyone think that Harrison was not spiritual, even though he was vociferously critical of Christianity and religion, after Harrison died, Reverend Ethelred Brown, who was the head of the Harlem Unitarian Church, renamed it the Hubert Harrison Memorial Church, which speaks to the deep spiritual power that Harrison carried as he walked through the streets of Harlem. It conjures the designation of Moses for Harriet Tubman, right? Or perhaps the St. John Coltrane Church in San Francisco. In another place and time, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, right? The only Haitian revolutionary figure to ascend to the status of a loi, or venerated spirit, in the Vodun tradition. Now, this is a time as well when you have the rise of the robber barons, what we now today call billionaire oligarchs, right? People like Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and Carnegie and Morgan. And you know, these individuals basically monopolized industries like oil, railroads, steel, and banking, and they got wealthy by exploiting the labor of the workers that worked in those industries. One group of workers that you see here, convict laborers, were exploited for their labor. And one of my favorite questions to ask students about this picture is, can you see the robber barons in this picture? I see people shaking their heads no. Oftentimes students will be like, oh, what about those guys in the background? No, those are not the robber barons. Those are, you know, foremen or supervisors or whatever. But, you know, what are they building? A railroad, right? Likely to be owned by Vanderbilt. And what are those railroad ties made of? Steel, likely to be owned by Carnegie, right? And what is powering the railroad as it's going, the train as it's going along the tracks? Oil, coal, things like that, right? That's likely to be owned by Rockefeller. And then who's providing the finance capital for railroad development? People like J.P. Morgan, right? So you think you're looking at a picture of convict laborers, and you are, but you're also seeing the billionaire oligarchs of Harrison's day and how they got rich. We could talk about steel workers. We could talk about child labor, another source of wealth for the oligarchs at that time. And of course, their economic power led to political power, right? Here's a picture of Rockefeller holding up, in case you can't see the caption, it says, "What a funny little government," right? J.P. Morgan here pictured rowing Uncle Sam, right? It shows you that these oligarchs actually had much more power than the U.S. government, much more wealth than the GDP of the United States. This is why radical labor unions emerged, like the industrial workers of the world, which sought to organize workers into one big union and on a multiracial basis fight the bosses and fight capitalism. The Socialist Party, which Harrison is going to join, is in the ascendancy in this period, right? People like Eugene Debs become some of the most popular socialist figures in U.S. history. Debs here says, "We demand the machinery of production in the name of the workers and the control of the society in the name of the people. We demand the abolition of capitalism and wage slavery and the surrender of the capitalist class. We demand complete enfranchisement of women and equal rights of all the people, regardless of race, color, creed, or nationality." So, socialism, like anything else, gets better when you blacken it. So Harrison emerges as a pioneering black socialist, right? In 1912, for example, almost exactly 1 century before the Occupy Wall Street movement, Harrison occupied the attention of a massive group of people right outside the New York Stock Exchange, and he was basically making the case for socialism, denouncing all the traders and capitalists on Wall Street, and he spoke for 3 hours, right? And he had this massive group of people, and as the time went on, the group came closer and closer because his voice was getting more and more hoarse. But it shows you his boldness, his kind of fearlessness to speak truth in the face of power, right? He founds the Colored Socialist Club in Harlem. This is the first official party-led formation, black-led party formation, which was designed to recruit black workers and organizers into the Socialist Party. We could talk about Harrison's theoretical contributions as a black socialist. He said, "Whenever large groups of men profit in injustice to other men, they'll evolve a system of ethics to reconcile their minds to that injustice. They cannot continue to do wrong without calling that wrong right. That is why the capitalist class cannot even think justice as far as the workers are concerned. And that is why men who think they can see a social or economic advantage for themselves in the degradation of the Negro will continue to think that degradation right." So we could talk about the pyramid of social classes. I like using this imagery with students to show them that, you know, there's the elites on top and all these groups of workers on the bottom. And this is why Harrison supported things like the 1913 Paterson, New Jersey silk strike. This was a strike of silk workers in Paterson, New Jersey, mostly Jewish women, actually. Some 20,000 workers go out on strike. And I wanted to share what Harrison's, an excerpt of what he said to the strikers, because you have to imagine this forceful black orator speaking to a union hall full of mostly European descended workers. What did he tell them? He said this: "We consider whether right or wrong, every blow struck by labor against capital is a blow for labor. As for the Socialist Party, no one asked the Socialist Party to come into this strike. Let it stay out if it dares. In season and out of season, we socialists must go to the workers to hear what we must do. The revolution is coming from not coming from above, but from below, working its way up from the depths. We are not here because they invaded our rights. We have none. We never had any. We are working not to get rights, but to get might. And when we have that, we will have right." So this is such a beautiful kind of encapsulation of what it means, meant for Harrison to be a socialist in the context of this strike, right? The party is kind of not so interested in the strike, or it's a little bit, the sort of moderate leadership of the party is not so excited, but Harrison's with the workers, right? He's saying we need to build working class power. And here's a picture that really captures the unique role he's in, right? As the only black sort of leader sitting with all these other strike leaders. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn is in the middle, famous IWW leader. Big Bill Haywood is in the front on the right, another famous Socialist Party and IWW leader. And you can see Harrison's a little disgruntled here for reasons we can imagine. Harrison was such an extraordinary orator that he built what many Harlem residents called the outdoor university. This is a street corner speaking tradition that would continue in subsequent generations. Here's a picture of the stepladder speaker, right, generating a huge audience of people outdoors. I have a whole chapter on this because it's just such a fascinating aspect of the work that Harrison was engaged in. Fast forward, 1917, President Wilson declares the U.S. is going to enter World War I to make the world safe for democracy. Of course, there was no democracy for African Americans in the South and many other places, but in any case, the U.S. enters the war, which Harrison calls a white world war, right? Adding a racial analysis to what is happening here. This is the time of the Russian Revolution, right? One of the massive results and consequences of this war is that people were politically awakening all around the world. In Harlem, Harrison founds the Liberty League of Negro Americans after he leaves the Socialist Party. And this is an organization which, as you can tell from this flyer, was designed to stop lynching and disfranchisement in the land which we love and make the South safe for democracy, right? So you can see this meeting, June 12th, 1917, 2,000 people packed the Bethel Church to basically give new life and found this Liberty League organization, which had a race-first doctrine. It had a mass movement orientation, right, with thousands of people, black folks coming together for collective self-help. It had an internationalist politics, right, supporting the struggles of colonized people in other countries, and a tricolor flag, the black, brown, and yellow, which was meant to symbolize the relationship of black folks to each other and to other people of color. Here's the membership card. I pulled this out of the Harrison archive, and you can see Africa First was literally inscribed on one's membership in the Liberty League. Now, of course, this is also the time of the Red Summer. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Red Summer, 1919. There's over 24 pogroms and massacres of black people taking place all over the country, including, obviously, right here in Washington, D.C. So I wanted to say because this was happening here in Washington, I wanted to share what Harrison said about a comment he made about this moment. He said, "When I hear great masses of my fellow men referred to as rats, I recall how in the great Washington and Chicago race riots, it was the rats who upheld the honor of the race and fought to maintain its safety from murderous assaults. I feel that we owe them a vast debt of gratitude, even though they belong to the lowest levels of those whom we call the common people. Much golden eloquence has been squandered upon the successful and the good. Much stern condemnation has been vented upon the wicked and unclad. I venture now to plead for those of our poor brothers and sisters who are despised and rejected of men, for after all, they are the real tests of our theories of brotherhood and racial solidarity. The new Negro movement. This is a moment where black folks are awakening, much like people all around the world are awakening in the aftermath of World War I. And one of the consequences of that is the rise of Garvey and Garveyism, right? Garvey begins with the idea that he's going to create a Tuskegee-style institute in Jamaica. That was the original plan of Garvey, right? Building a brick-and-mortar school to emulate industrial education in Jamaica, and he founds the UNIA with Amy Ashwood in 1914 to do just that. A couple years later, though, the UNIA is this massive transnational, the largest transnational organization of African people that we've ever seen. So how did it go from a Tuskegee building project in Jamaica to this massive organization? We'll come back to that in a second. But I also want to just emphasize the impact of Garvey and Garveyism on subsequent generations of African nationalists, right? Because it grew so large, it impacted people like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Malcolm X, of course, right? Many of us will know that both of Malcolm X's parents, Earl Little and Louise Little, were active in the Garvey movement in Michigan. So, so there's a rich impact that Garvey and Garveyism have all around the world. But what has been missing from that analysis or understanding is the role of Harrison's Liberty League, because when Garvey comes to New York, he joins Harrison's Liberty League, right? He joins an organization that's talking about race first and Africa first, right? That's talking about a mass movement, right? 2,000 people packing the church, a black internationalist perspective, supporting the struggles of people around the world, and a tricolor flag. Okay, of course, Garvey is associated with and founds the red, black, and green. But as Harrison said, this was sort of an extension of the Liberty League's black, brown, and yellow. So this is a massive, massive deal because there's been this kind of gap in the Garvey movement historiography where Harrison should be. Now Harrison, Garveyism gets so large, the UNIA grows so fast and so rapidly, Garvey ends up asking Harrison to join and edit the Negro World newspaper. And Harrison does. He becomes the editor of Garvey's Negro World newspaper. And as in that role, he starts observing Garvey in very intimate settings, and he starts developing a critique of Garvey, right? And he has some differences with Garvey. I'll just give one example. We can talk more about this in the discussion if you like. But one of the things is Garvey had an imperial vision, right? Garvey envisioned, in his own words, uniting a scattered Negro race who before the close of many centuries will found an empire on which the sun shall shine as ceaselessly as it shines on the empire of the North today, right? He declared himself the provisional president of Africa and had this vision of a black empire. Harrison is using his position as editor of the Negro World to try and push the Garvey movement in a very different direction, in an anti-imperialist direction. So there's this editorial, for example, called Wanted, a Colored International, where he says, a call should be issued for a Congress of the darker races, which should be frankly anti-imperialistic, and should serve as an international center of cooperation from which strength may be drawn for the various sections of the world of color. The Congress should be made up of those who realize that capitalist imperialism, which mercilessly exploits the darker races for its own financial purposes, is the enemy which we must combine to fight. So you can see here the tension, right, between black empire versus black anti-empire. And this idea of the colored international would basically find fruition ultimately in the Bandung Conference in 1955, when you had all these colonized peoples coming together to try and advance the struggle for independence and liberation. All right, let me fast forward just in the sake of time. Here's a document I found in the archive which opened up a whole world of questions and ideas, right? And in the case of this book, a whole chapter in the book. This is Harrison's 6 lectures on sex, one of the most sensitive and controversial and very personal topics. Harrison develops what I call a black free love politics. So I want to just give you a bit of a sample of what that means. So here's a talk. His second talk is marriage versus free love, right? Harrison was a free lover. Now, many people wonder, well, what is free love? This is a tradition that goes back at least to the 19th century of European American sex radicals like Victoria Woodhull, who defined it this way. She said, yes, I'm a free lover. I have an inalienable constitutional and natural right to love whom I may, to love as long or short a period as I can, to change that love every day if I please, and with that right, neither you nor any law you can frame have any right to interfere, right? So basically the idea was that sexual and romantic relations should not be dependent on a church or a state to be valid, right? But instead on love. Harrison, among other things, is the first black advocate of decriminalizing access to contraception. This was a very controversial thing at the time because it was illegal, right? I'll come back to all the laws in just a second. But this is a very distinctive thing that he's actually, saying these laws should be done away with, these laws against contraception and abortion and so on and so forth. Of course, the church, we looked at Harrison's critique of the church. The church, as you can imagine, which was full of people with ideas of what Harrison called the puritanic prudes. Most churches opposed contraception, abortion, sex outside of marriage, right? Masturbation, sex work, homosexuality. All these things were taboo in the eyes of the church. And not just taboo in the eyes of the church, but illegal in the eyes of the state. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Comstock laws. These are laws from the late 1800s, which basically criminalized all manner of things sexual. So contraceptives were illegal. Abortion was illegal, sex toys were illegal, extramarital sex was illegal, anal sex and oral sex were illegal, sex education pamphlets were illegal, erotica of any kind was illegal, paintings depicting too much skin were considered obscene and often criminalized. Novels with sexual themes or contents were gone after by this guy, Anthony Comstock, who sort of became the national censor of all things sexual, and founded this organization, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, which literally, got people put in jail, encouraged people to, basically, some people even committed suicide because they were so fearful of the persecution by the Comstock laws and Comstock himself. Harrison denounces the Comstock laws. He denounces all this. Here's an interesting talk on whether we are monogamists by nature. Harrison did not believe we are monogamists by nature. Most European thinkers at this time saw monogamy as one of the marks of civilization, right? One of the marks of an advanced civilization, which of course only Christian European Bible holders had achieved. This contrasts with people like Edward Wilmot Blyden, a fellow Virgin Islander to Harrison, who wrote this famous book, African Life and Customs, where he says African economic life was naturally cooperative and not individualistic or egoistic. Blyden argues that the foundation of the African family is plural marriage, and contrary to the general opinion, this marriage rests upon the will of the woman because it lightened her labor in the home. She could share the cooking and cleaning and child rearing duties with other women. This idea that it takes a village to raise a child, right, as against the kind of privatized nuclear family conception that Western Europeans held. And of course, if you look at indigenous people all around the world, especially before colonization, none of them placed monogamy at the center of the universe when it comes to matters of sex, love, and marriage. This was something that European colonialism imposed on the world, and that's why scholars like Patricia Hill Dixon, who's one of the only people to write a book-length work on non-monogamy in black communities, she says it was not until after the 15th century with European world conquest and domination that the idea of polygyny as an inferior marriage practice and monogamy as the superior marriage practice came to dominate the world. Now, I had a funny exchange with Robin D.G. Kelly at the Socialism Conference in Chicago last month, because he was like, wait, polygamy is not free love. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm not saying polygamy is free love. I'm saying that the fact that so many indigenous peoples all around the world had allowed for polygamy, right, in the Muslim world and in Africa and Asia and Latin America, just suggests that we are actually not monogamists by nature, right? Regardless of what you think of polygamy, clearly we're not naturally monogamous if so many indigenous peoples are practicing this. And this brings me to the last point on this that I want to make, which is sexual repression and the impact of that, right? Audre Lorde says, in order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. For women, this has meant a suppression of the erotic as a considered source of power and information within our lives. And there's such a range of African sexualities on the continent before colonization, all kinds of different gender conceptions, all kinds of different erotic energy exchange traditions. You know, the Dagara people, for example, in Burkina Faso, they saw what we would think of as LGBT people. They saw them as gatekeepers, people who held the gates to this world and the spirit world, or had one foot in this world and one foot in the spirit world. They were venerated, they were honored, they had a specific place in the community. They could balance masculine, feminine energy imbalances, they could resolve conflicts, they could be peacemakers in the community. So when you oppress that group, you're taking away forces that could provide energy for change, right, and fighting oppression. Now, in this period, the blues women are some of the most free, the most liberated, right? People like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith and Alberta Hunter and Gladys Bentley and Lucille Bogan and so on. They're giving voice to a kind of sexual freedom, right? Not just in terms of non-monogamous relationships, but non-heteronormative relationships, right? Women, same-gender loving relationships, women's bodily autonomy, women's independence, and so on and so forth. And what Audre Lorde says about the suppression of the erotic and the impact on women was also true for black men in this period, because not only was lynching a national epidemic, but it often included castration, right, which is a direct attack on black masculine erotic power and manhood more generally. So I share all this because I'm sure we're familiar with these tropes, right? The black male sexual threat trope, right? Which was often the justification for lynching. Films like Birth of a Nation, which depicted the black male brute, right? And I share all this because if you can imagine a context with rampant church repression of sexuality, rampant state repression of sexuality, rampant anti-black repression of sexuality, to come out as a black free lover in this moment is almost unspeakably rare and risky and revolutionary. So I have a whole chapter on the book called Black Free Love Politics and the Queer New Negro, because it's one of the most generative, if somewhat controversial, dimensions of Harrison's radicalism. All right, last piece that I want to share before we get into conversation is the inevitable question, right? How has Hubert Henry Harrison been so thoroughly erased from popular memory, and even from scholarly historiography for that matter? Well, in the book I use this metaphor of the touchstone, right? That Harrison's example functions like a touchstone. A touchstone is a hard, dark stone that is used to test the purity of metals. So you rub some metal against the stone to see how pure that metal is. If it makes streaks on the stone, it tells you that maybe it's not as pure, right? And so I see Harrison as a touchstone because, you know, he exposes the impurities of the Socialist Party, the fact that they weren't willing to recruit black workers in the way that Harrison was trying to get them to do. And so the Socialist Party historians wrote Harrison out of the story, right? The Garvey movement, right? Harrison had a deep impact on Garvey and Garveyism, but he became critical of Garvey and exposed a number of Garvey's limitations. And so Garvey movement historians tended to write him out of the origin story of Garveyism. Another complex example is what I call the Renaissance School of Negro History. And I have a whole chapter about this because Alain Locke comes along in 1925 and reinterprets the radical New Negro movement as a Negro Renaissance of arts and culture, basically sort of overriding and overwriting the radical New Negro of the post-war years with this kind of hand-picked Negro exponents of what white people could see as marketable and commercializable. right? Funny story, Harrison said that the matter of a Negro literary renaissance is like the snakes of Ireland. There isn't any. Now what he means is people who are pushing this Renaissance trope are demonstrating their ignorance of the rich tradition of black literary production from the 1850s all the way up to the 1920s, right? William Wells Brown, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Pauline Hopkins, Charles Chestnut, right? There's all these black literary figures that are sort of ignored by this new declaration of a Renaissance that had the support of white publishers. And so that's a complicated one. That's why I have a whole chapter on this. But yeah, that's another way that Harrison is a touchstone, right? Is that he's exposing the limitations or the impurities of this new Renaissance narrative. Lastly, I just have to share this because Robin means so much to me. Robin D.G. Kelley, the guy who authored a book on the black radical imagination, said that Brian Kwoba has written a beautiful intellectual biography as radical and original as its subject. That just moves me because of who it's coming from, right? This is not just anybody saying this. So with that, I will stop talking for a moment. And before I welcome Dr. Maurice Jackson up and introduce him, I would like to give you all a moment to actually just talk about and process all that I just shared, because it was a lot of information. So we're literally gonna take 2 or 3 minutes, just turn and talk to a neighbor and share, what do you make of this whole story of Harrison, and yeah, like what strikes you, what thoughts come up, what do you make of Hubert Henry Harrison? Take a moment and turn and talk to a neighbor. All right, y'all. It's too soft. I'm gonna have to go teacher on that. It's okay. All right, y'all. Let's come back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So I'm now going to invite Dr. Maurice Jackson to come up and actually first let's introduce him. Yeah. Dr. Ichile, please introduce Dr. Jackson.
Hi again, family. All right, this is an honor. Dr. Maurice Jackson is an associate professor of history and African American studies and an affiliated professor of music, jazz, at Georgetown University, whose scholarship bridges historical inquiry with cultural expression. He is the author and co-editor of several influential works, including Let This Voice Be Heard, Anthony Benezet, father of Atlantic abolitionism, African Americans and the Haitian Revolution, Quakers and Their Allies in the Abolitionist Cause, 1754 to 1808, and DC Jazz, Stories of Jazz Music in Washington, D.C. Deeply influenced by his grandmother's wisdom, Ashe, Jackson's academic work is shaped by a commitment to uncovering histories of Black resilience, activism, and artistic innovation, especially in his hometown of Washington, D.C. His path to academia was forged through lived experience and a love of learning. Born in Virginia, Jackson held roles as a shipyard laborer, longshoreman, house painter, and human rights organizer before returning to university, where he eventually earned his master's and doctorate degrees. His tenure as a scholar at the Wilson Center provided space for reflection and connection, fueling his research into the political and cultural forces that define African American life. Through works like Rhythms of Resistance and Resilience, Jackson illuminates how everyday people, often overlooked by history, use music, community, and quiet defiance to shape Black identity and drive social change. His enduring focus remains on the grassroots acts of resilience that have transformed the narrative of Black Washington. Welcome, Dr. Maurice Jackson.
Check, check.
There you go. All right. Yeah, I don't need, okay.
Check, check, check. So, Dr. Jackson, it's an honor to welcome you and joining me in conversation. I can see by your book that you read this book very, very carefully and meticulously. So, yeah, what are your thoughts, questions, comments, reflections? Where do we begin?
Well, you know, I just have a habit. I buy these little markers and I mark up the book. And then I write in the back. And in fact, I wrote so much on it that I had to buy another one so that he could sign it so I can leave it to my kids. I think it's a wonderful book. Robin Kelly, who's an old friend, got it just right. And I've you know, I've read, of course, the period books on Harrison, but you take a bit of a different angle. So a couple of things I want to go at that you're challenging certain orthodoxies. First of all, you challenge the notion of Cromwell and Blyden and others who go to Africa, who most of us think, you know, with positive ideas, they go to educate, but you, in a subtle way, put them in the camp of some of those who agree with the scramble of Africa. In essence, you question whether or not they are part of this notion of this civilizing mission. And I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one example that comes to mind in that question is Martin Delany, right? Who is widely credited with coining the slogan "Africa for the Africans," which of course Garvey and the Garvey movement would take up. But what I found in my research is that there's a second part of that slogan. It was Africa for the Africans and black men to rule them. And basically the idea was that Western blacks from the diaspora were to go over and provide capital and skills and help develop Africa. So yeah, I see it as a variation, a black variation on a colonial theme, right? This idea that even well-meaning African Americans who go to Africa with the wrong mindset can often do harm or do damage or reproduce colonial mentalities about continental Africans. Alexander Crummell is another example. You know, he had a more missionary and Christian-inflected zeal than Delany. Which again is this idea that, you know, we need to bring the light of Christianity to Africans. So it was coming from a good place, right? They did feel the pain of the suffering that might have existed on the continent, but the response of, oh, let's go and Christianize them, let's go and develop them, no matter how well-meaning that is, right, there's still something problematic at the root. And that's why I find Harrison such a breath of fresh air when he says, look, we need to go there to learn from them, not to teach them, not to civilize, but to learn from them. And that's something that, of course, you know, would develop further as the 20th century unfolded and as black radicals started to support the indigenous liberation struggles and cultures and peoples and ways on the continent.
Thank you, and of course, you know, Cromwell is a legend in Washington because he had a church here. Now, you go at another angle too. Let's look at this new Negro concept. Booker T. Washington actually in 1903 wrote a book, A New Negro for a New Century. Mm-hmm. So Booker T. Washington is bringing, now it's a different type of new Negro. Mm-hmm. Now, so you have three people. So you have Booker T. Washington's idea, and then, as you point out, that when the new Negro anthology comes out, Harrison's work is omitted because Locke thinks it's a bit too radical. Go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so the new Negro is a trope that goes back to the 19th century. You know, basically the post-Civil War, post-Reconstruction era is when people start talking about a new Negro, right? Because slavery's over and it's a time for rethinking what it means to be black in this country. So Booker T. Washington has his version. Many people have their version. And Alain Locke comes along. By the way, Harrison, before we get to Locke, there's a publication that Harrison edits in 1919 called The New Negro Magazine, right? And it's basically giving voice to the radical new Negro of the immediate post-World War I era. The class radicalism of black folks who were in the socialist or communist parties or in the industrial workers of the world, radical labor unionists, but also the race radicalism, right, of the kind of Garveyist or black nationalist or black internationalist folks. And Locke comes along with his New Negro anthology in 1925, which reinterprets that phrase yet again as a renaissance of arts and culture. And not just any arts and culture, but politically non-threatening arts and culture, right? There's a famous dinner at the Civic Club in 1924 where there's a white publisher who's literally lecturing these young black artists like Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Bennett and all these folks and saying, what we really want is art, not anger. In other words, they wanted something that they could sell, that they could market to white audiences. That was their conception of a renaissance, right? White people going up, discovering the Negro in his natural habitat in Harlem and saying, oh, we can sell this. We can make money off of this. That is the conception of the new Negro that Locke is basically sort of recruited into pushing. And to his credit, Locke very quickly realizes that, right? And he ends up calling the whole thing a Negrophile fad. And that's an amazing thing for Locke to say, because he was the midwife of this whole Renaissance trope, right? He, by the late 20s, is already seeing the damage that's been done, and he kind of reacts against it. But it's become a trope by that time that white publishers are actually making money from. And then it gets a new lease on life as the 20th century unfolds, particularly after the 60s with the Harlem Renaissance. So it moves from a Negro Renaissance to a Harlem Renaissance in the sort of post-World War II period. But it's the same idea, right? You have these hand-picked artists, and not just anything from a Langston Hughes, but the non-radical stuff of Langston Hughes, right? The non-radical stuff of Claude McKay. There's a moment where Locke literally changes the title of Claude McKay's poem called "The White House." It's a vociferous attack on the racism of the U.S. presidency, but Locke changes the title from "The White House" to "White Houses," and basically it just neuters the attack, the politics of the poem. And McKay is shocked that Locke would do this, and he's writing letters to Locke like, is this the way you handle artists? Like, you just change the title of their work whenever you want to? So that's part of what I'm critiquing in the book.
It leaves out people like Nugent and other people.
Yes. So Locke's anthology leaves out a whole lot of people. It leaves out the black class radicals, the Garveyists, the blues women, right? Anybody who was actually doing something liberatory. And even the pieces from a Claude McKay that were liberatory, he leaves all those out, and he just goes for the most kind of white palatable productions.
Now, I spent many years studying, the communist movement most of my life, and I was intrigued by your approach to parts of it, because you were raising this question of the Garvey notion of race first, and then race in Harrison wants a class look. But he joins the Socialist Party, but he keeps himself a bit apart from the IWW. So my question is this: why did he not join the ABB? Why did he not join the African, with Domingo and other people like that, W.A. Domingo, West Indian radicals? And especially because he's studying theory, because you mentioned you have both ways studying. Lenin, of course, Trotsky is not on the scene yet, but he's on the scene, but he's not looking at him. He looks at that. But it's something holds him back. Is it? Because even as I read it about him, and he's a collective man, but he's very much an individualist too. From what I've So, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Harrison influenced that whole generation, right? The first, well, first he influenced the subsequent generation of black socialists, meaning A. Philip Randolph, Chandler Owen, Grace Campbell, but also the first generation of black communists, people like Richard B. Moore, W.A. Domingo, Grace Campbell, Williana Burroughs. And he, at the time that they are forming the African Blood Brotherhood, he is really, I can see him as a kindred spirit. So for example, there's a moment in 1921 where Harrison convenes a meeting of the Black Reds to talk about whether they could make the Garvey movement more class conscious. And they end up attending that second UNIA convention in 1921 to try to do just that. So he's working with black communists in Harlem, but he's not joining the Communist Party. And I think that's why he didn't join the ABB, because he felt that it was on a kind of communist or communist orbiting level. And of course, they end up joining the Communist Party, the ABBers. And that's because of his experience in the Socialist Party, right? There's a place in the book where I say Harrison was once bitten, twice shy when it comes to the white left, right? He had a negative experience in the Socialist Party because they couldn't handle him. And so he was twice shy about the Communist Party once it emerges.
But now Deb says, if I'm correct, that if you solve the class problem, you automatically solve the race problem. But the ABB never said that. But this is what the whites, and neither did Big Bill Haywood say that, did he? So.
Yeah, the problem is that the best of the white radicals were still in a minority oftentimes in a party that was not just majority white, but majority racist, right, one way or the other. I mean, there was a racist wing of the Socialist Party. There was a kind of, colorblind wing like Deb's. And then the Communist Party, it took some time for them to actually develop their race politics. And so I think that's all of that is why Harrison was really kind of skeptical of white leftists after the Socialist Party experience.
In this section of free love, but I noticed that, or maybe you did, but the whole, and that's Anand, and this is the whole Russian angle in the early 30s. And it's there, but I don't know if he's influenced by that or not. I tried to find it, but I couldn't. But is he? Is he looking at the experiments in other countries about this, this concept? And I ask this because it's obvious, at least we read, he has 3 or 4 daughters. He has 3 or 4 children. And, I'm not in his place. I don't know. But in all his ideas, he sort of, I can't tell how hard he is trying to raise his family, to be, not just a radical, but a good brother who's, you get me?
Yeah.
And I just can't see it, and it's no excuse, because all of us has been in the movement, but we know the first thing is to take care of our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Harrison, he loved his children. He loved his wife till his dying day, and also he was a free lover. And so there's a moment where it can't hold anymore. Right around 1913, 1914, the tensions in the home that his free love lifestyle create they can't hold anymore. And so he ends up moving out of the house, but continuing to co-parent the children with his wife Lynn. And it's wild because that happens in 1914. 6 years later, 1920, they have their 5th child, right? A son, William. So they had 4 daughters, and all these years later, they have another son, William. So it just shows that they still loved each other. They still, they still cared for each other. As I said, Harrison, to his dying day, he showed love for Lynn, but it was one of those contradictions and complexities of living in a world where compulsory monogamy was the standard. And his wife, Lynn, I think very much, wanted that. She was a Christian woman, she was a little bit more traditional in that sense. And, but Harrison and monogamy didn't mix. And so, so that's why he ended up leaving the house, but still trying to do his best to show up for the kids. But it was a complex situation. I think that, this is why I think this question is so generative, right? Because the question of sex is not just an abstraction, like, oh, what is your view on imperialism? This is something that impacts your daily life, how you relate to your family, how you relate to your love lover or lovers, how you relate to your children, right? This is a very concrete, very practical thing. And so when we think about how do we get free there, it becomes very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
And one last question. Harrison comes to Washington, and he is one of the first people that Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, assigns a man named Walter Loving. He assigns the first black agent he assigns them because he sees how, and Hoover is reporting back to Woodrow Wilson about Harrison and others as he's reading the newspapers. And then as he goes, but you also mentioned that at a certain point, Loving convinces Harrison to write some articles that are somewhat supportive of their policies. This is the contradiction, and you have a wonderful line. You have that somehow people like Du Bois or Harrison felt they could outsmart these intelligence agencies. And whenever they did it, it backfired on them. Du Bois tried it, and Du Bois wanted to go into the military, but he saw he couldn't. And you point out that that Harrison, even at one point, dabbled with the idea of becoming, because everybody wanted to wear this uniform. But tell us, so there are contradictions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't mention is there's a moment where Du Bois tries to become a captain in military intelligence during World War I. And
Quoted by Spingarn, who's already a colonel.
Yes, exactly. And Harrison is talking to Major Loving, this black military intelligence officer, and Loving actually is trying to understand what this is going to mean for Du Bois's utility to the government if he joins, because he realizes that if Du Bois joins military intelligence, he's going to lose legitimacy in the eyes of the people. They'll see him as a sellout. And so he gets Harrison to kind of expose this, which ends up aborting the attempt that Du Bois made to become an agent. And
Du Bois is already almost 60. I mean, he's quite.
Yeah, but then Harrison is also, as you said, there's a moment where he considers joining the military himself. He thought that if the war came to the U.S., then he would fight. Right. But then the same day that he's considering this at night, he reads an article about the racism that black soldiers are experiencing in France, and he's like, forget it. Like, he completely abandons the idea of joining the military because he's reminded of how racist even black soldiers are treated despite wearing the uniform, right? Despite fighting for democracy and all of these things. So yeah, there's some very interesting complexities and places to critique Harrison's behavior, and I think this is one of them. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, I must say it's a wonderful book, and I've learned a lot. And I'm doing some work on Washington, D.C., so it's very helpful. And I've always admired his work, and you've just put together a compilation that will stand the test of time. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So, thank you. So at this point, I want to open it up for whatever time we have left to hear from the audience, right? What are your reflections, your questions, your thoughts? Would love to take a couple from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you for this work. Thank you for being here in the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for incredible questions. Particularly your last exchange. Can you just expand on, I think a lot of modern day radicals, one of the good things that are produced from the various communities, the various stakeholders, is a sense of adjacency. Even if you're not joining or formally participating in a group, there's an acknowledgement, there's a mindfulness in behaving collectively. Can you expand on Harrison's sense and practice of adjacency? I mean, you've given us quite a few examples, but maybe there's something direct that you can say to us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, before you answer, there were some people watching online and said, Dr. Jackson, if you could speak up a little bit louder, it's harder for them to hear on the stream.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, adjacency. Have you read the book by any chance yet?
I'm beginning.
You've begun, okay. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by adjacency, but I.
Well, I'll be really loud. I hate to invoke this, but I'm going to. If you think of Ruthie Gilmore, and you think about her tremendous influence on various groups on for using shorthand on the left, she always emphasizes that efforts for justice, for humanity, for human flourishing, you may not have somebody join your party, you may not have somebody join your group, but if you look at the history of everything, you see that they're supportive. We as black folk experience that on so many levels. Whether you're a student in the cafeteria woman who looks like you, gives you an extra word and an extra portion of food because she knows what you're doing, and that student turns around and supports livable wages and decent working conditions. That's, to me, the practice of adjacency. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that A. Philip Randolph said that is very poignant here is that he called Hubert Harrison the father of Harlem radicalism. And so when we think about all of the people that come out of Harlem, right? For example, Ella Baker was trained in Harlem, right? John Henrik Clark, you know, comes out of the Harlem training. People like Arturo Schomburg, right? Who founds this extraordinary Schomburg Center, what is now the Schomburg Center at the 135th Street branch. Harrison had a deep impact on that milieu, and so by extension, there's kind of a ripple effect, right, in the way that he's able to impact the sort of culture of Harlem that is generating some of these amazing figures. And in the case of Schomburg, I mean, Harrison was literally a close friend of Schomburg's. They would talk all the way into the night about, you know, African history and culture. Harrison actually helped move Schomburg's books from Brooklyn, where Schomburg lived, to the Harlem branch of the library, where they now form the Schomburg Center. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of figures that Harrison is adjacent to, or is working with, or is impacting, and oftentimes those ripple effects haven't been clear because we haven't studied Harrison, but they're there, you know. And and in my book, I try to show some of the legacies and continuities, right, of an A. Philip Randolph. The fact that Randolph goes on to influence the March on Washington, right, when he forms in the 1940s, first the March on Washington movement, and then of course in the 60s you have the actual March on Washington. A lot of that is rooted in efforts like the Liberty Congress of Negro Americans right here in Washington, 1918, which I'm sure Dr. Jackson knows a lot about, but it was a gathering of African Americans who wanted to protest or voice their grievances during World War I, at a time when it was illegal to do that, right? So yeah, there's a lot of figures that I try to address in the book, because it's like once you find that there's a figure like Harrison that's been so scandalously marginalized and ignored, and you study him, you end up learning about others, right? You end up learning about other hidden histories that haven't gotten the attention that they deserve. One last example of adjacency I can think of just right off the top is Ida B. Wells, right? Ida B. Wells plays a groundbreaking role in the struggle against lynching, and Harrison, not only did he meet Wells eventually in 1924 when he visits Chicago, but the Liberty League built directly on Wells's legacy, because anti-lynching was one of the main things that the Liberty League was concerned about. And so there's all kinds of interesting connections and sort of configurations of black thought that I try to place Harrison in that larger world, in that larger context. I see a hand back there. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll pass the mic back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Kwoba, Dr. Jackson, thank you both for the conversation, and thank you for the historical recovery. I'm sure everyone here will agree. It's refreshing to see that the personality of Hubert Harrison has been brought back to the fore, particularly when, you know, people like, you know, his predecessor, or not his predecessor, but what's his name? Who he influenced. Garvey, thank you. That link between the two of these men is so obscure, right? Most of us are not aware of that. I wondered if you could speak a little about the sources that you use. I'm excited to sort of go through the book and look at the sources used to reconstruct the history, because I think often we have to, as historians, go to the archives, go to oral histories. And then also, if you could just say a little bit about, I know you said I think it took you like a decade to this is a long work in progress. And so it's
Absolutely.
finally come to fruition. If you could talk about the experience, right, of sort of over time, revisiting and sustaining this project.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this project started as a PhD dissertation in 2013. And so it's been about 12 years before it's reached the fruition of becoming a book. And of course, that's a long journey and a lot of experiences I had in archives. I mean, I looked at, for example, here in Washington, I went to the Alain Locke papers, at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center here in Howard. When I was writing that chapter about the Renaissance School of Negro History, I wanted to understand Locke, at an archival level. Like, what did he actually do to create this new Negro anthology? What were the conversations he was having with the white publisher? Of course, the Harrison papers at Columbia University now is a massive archive of Harrison's writings, his diaries, his scrapbooks. There's a lot of, that was probably the main archive that I consulted for this book. But I looked at the Richard B. Moore papers at the Schomburg Center, the Claude McKay papers also at the Schomburg Center. I tried to place Harrison in his context and in his world and all of the interlocutors that he's engaging with. So I often went to archives of those people, right, to see what are they saying and doing. Does Harrison show up, in this archive or that archive? The journey was a long one. It's the Free Love chapter, for example. That one I was able to write. It wasn't part of the dissertation, but I ended up getting a Schomburg Fellowship about 4 years ago. Spent a whole year as a scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center, which allowed me to do the research on that chapter and to write that chapter. And it was interesting because I was also able to kind of take advantage of being in New York by checking out some of the sort of black kink communities, right, and black sex radical spaces in New York as a way to also better understand what that might have been like in the era of the so-called Harlem Renaissance, when there was also a lot of sexual experimentation and black queer sexualities and things of that nature that were emerging, not just among the blues women, but people like Langston Hughes and Claude McKay and, Zora Neale Hurston and Alain Locke, and like a lot of these figures. There's an aspect of the Harlem Renaissance that we've now acknowledged. There was queer Henry Louis Gates put it in a very clumsy way. He said, the Harlem Renaissance was as queer as it was black, sorry. He said it was as gay as it was black, which is a bit clumsy. But even acknowledging that, not a lot of people have talked about the non-monogamy of that culture, right? And so that raises questions. Well, what's the relationship between black polyamory or black non-monogamy and black queerness, right? And those are some of the intellectual questions that I had to wrestle with as well, because what I realized is that as much as black queer theory or black queer studies have produced amazing critiques of heteronormativity and homophobia and toxic patriarchal masculinity and things of that nature, when it comes to non-monogamy, there hasn't been as systematic an interrogation of monogamy, right? Even in that space, right? And so to me, that's like kind of a whole new world or a whole new frontier of critical, radical thought. And what I love about the chapter that I wrote is that I was able to show Harrison's radicalism has bearing on that, because he was able to connect capitalism and colonialism and white supremacy to compulsory monogamy as part of one larger, as all part of a package deal.
Hi, thank you for this. Is really great. I'm thinking about the quote that you had on the test of racial unity in the rats, and his writings on specifically that particular portion of the black community during that time. And so thinking about how there was, of course, as during a lot of points in the 20th century, in the black community, a lot of emphasis on an upper class and middle class blackness, and that being in direct contradiction to the idea that we should be focusing on the best of the race, therefore the ones that are the wealthiest. So thinking of I haven't read the book yet, excited to do that. Did you find in your writings any kind of, in his letters or works, the relationship between his work within socialist organizations, thinking of the socialist conceptions of like underclass, class dynamics, and the constructions of classes, and his thoughts of kind of like this black class analysis of the so-called rats of the race, and if there was a relationship there that you found, or if one informed the other in any way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the phrases that comes to mind from your question is the talented 10th, right? Which was kind of the dominant conception of Du Bois during the 1900s, 1910s. I mean, to Du Bois's credit, he becomes more radical in the 30s and becomes, communist and writes Black Reconstruction and so on. But in the Harrison era, the talented 10th was a very common notion. And Harrison was deeply and deliberately and consciously anti-elitist. He himself was from a humble class background. The son of plantation workers in St. Croix. But he also politically he identified with the common people. He was loved by the common people. I mean, there's very few people who've had a church named after them after they die, right? Especially those who are vociferous agnostics. That's almost unheard of. And so it just shows you the love that people had for him in Harlem. The outdoor university I mentioned, right, was literally a whole different conception of Black education. It was neither the industrial education of Tuskegee nor the kind of liberal arts education of Du Bois and the talented 10th people, right? This was literally education for the people. He would speak on street corners to audiences large enough to block traffic because he wanted to impart his knowledge. He had a brilliant mind. He read in all these different subjects, philosophy, sociology, anthropology. He would speak on global geopolitics, Black arts and culture, free love, abortion, all these different things. But he gave it to the people. He felt like the intellectuals needed to come down from their ivory towers, right? Come down from their Mount Sinai's and actually engage with ordinary common people, because he felt like they were the real people of the race, and the people who needed that knowledge in order to get free. And so it's a very distinctive thing that Harrison is doing in an educational, in a pedagogical sense, right? And that's why I spent a whole chapter on what I call the outdoor grioversity, because there's a griot element to what he's doing. There's a university-ish element in terms of learning and education. He read a lot and he was sharing, but there's an African element, which is the griot, right? The storyteller, the historian, the wisdom keeper, the poet, the orator. That is all a part of that as well. I saw a hand way in the back.
Yeah, right here. First off, thank you for the book. I've only just begun to digest it this week, so I'm chapter 2, chapter 3. But anyway, my own work is centered around Richard B. Moore and answering, trying to address gaps that his own daughter, Joyce Moore Turner, may have left out in his story. And as such, I wanted to ask two questions then. The first addressing how the archive speaks to Harrison's relationship with the African Blood Brotherhood. Dr. Jackson kind of hinted at this as they approached entry into the Communist Party by the mid-20s. Does the archive speak to that in any specific way, number one? And then the second part of that question would be, and I'm sure you know about the glowing praise that folks like Chandler Owen, A. Philip Randolph, and Richard B. Moore speak about Hubert Harrison as like an ideological, intellectual father, an opener of the ways, in a sense. So along those same lines, if you could speak to how Harrison and Moore, as guys who, have broken from the UNIA but been in part of it, but are still able to, Moore represents the UNIA, the Imperial League Against Imperialism, as late as I think 28 or 29, don't quote me on the date, but So
27.
27,
Yeah.
that's right. So just how is Moore and Harrison, to a larger degree, able to straddle both worlds intellectually, despite the personal, direct disappointment and an ability to like guide both sides of this this dialectic happening in twins? So yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky question, but a good question. Let me first say that Rose Pastor Stokes, this white woman communist, there's a moment, I believe it's around 1921, where she is trying to basically get black folks to join the Communist Party, and in particular to kind of, as Robert Hill puts it, that she wanted Harrison to be the Communist Party's stalking horse against Garvey, someone who could kind of, not just make the Garvey movement more class conscious, but maybe even like pull it in the direction of the Communist Party. And she makes a financial offer, like as if to suggest that she would be willing to fund a newspaper or something. Rose Pastor Stokes was, the daughter of a millionaire. And Harrison is like, nah. nice. I see the white money in front of me, but that's not what I'm about. Ever since his days in the Socialist Party, he developed a firm commitment that black organizations and black people needed to be black funded, right? Needed to be independent financially, not just intellectually or politically, but financially independent from white funding. Cyril Briggs took a different position. He accepted the funding offer, right? And that's part of how the ABB gets drawn into the orbit of the Communist Party, and they ultimately join the Communist Party. And so that's an interesting difference, right? That the sort of how you relate to the lure of even white radical funding, right? So that was the first story I wanted to share. But the other thing about Moore is that, there's so many people that go through the Garvey movement and have this sense that, well, Garvey is he's got a huge ego, right? I mean, it's like the test case of the HNIC syndrome that we've been struggling with for a very long time, and that was one of Harrison's grievances. He said that Garvey can't handle people in his organization that are more sort of talented or intelligent or politically sophisticated than him. He wants loyalty. He wants his subordinates to be loyal, right, and toe his line. And he doesn't countenance a lot of dissent within the organization. He's very authoritarian, right? You'll see in chapter 8, Harrison, I use Harrison's experience in the Garvey movement and Harrison's critique of Garvey to actually show some things that we haven't really heard or learned about Garvey. For example, the fact that, according to Harrison, there were these huge oil paintings of Garvey in his own residence. Like the ego, is another thing that Harrison was very critical of. And so I think people like Moore and Harrison, they understood what people like Ella Baker had to say about questions of leadership, right? Ella Baker said, we need group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. Let me say that one more time. We need group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. And Baker comes out of a Harlem training, right? So that's people like Moore and Harrison and Grace Campbell and Williana Burroughs, right? They understood that. There's something very democratic in a small d sense, right, about that conception, right? That it's not about the HNIC and, worshiping one figure at the top of a hierarchy. And I think that they were more sophisticated because they had that understanding, right? They were more in tune with what needed to happen at a grassroots level. When we're talking about a message for the grassroots, that's the kind of tradition that they stood for. I saw another hand in the back.
Real quick question, Brother Brian. Thank you so much for your sharing and the work that you did to put this book together. I have a question about the sourcing of the way we critique and frame socialism and black radical thought in general. And in particular, I'm thinking about the statement that you made early on in the book, and I haven't finished reading it, but my pre-reading suggests that, you say that Harrison built on the socialist and radical tradition in America, and you mentioned Peter Clark, but one thing that it seems like you didn't necessarily talk about the tail ends, how that socialism had actually a long lead up that's even before the 20th century, going back into the way that Sterling Stuckey talks about slave culture and nationalist theory as one of the roots of or ways of explaining the development of black radical thinking. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that, especially regarding his critique of Christianity, where you see Stuckey making the claim that basically black folks were not in the majority Christian up until really past 1900, where the process of converting black people into Christianity was a real thing. So in that way, Harrison isn't necessarily fully out of, that radicalism in a way is a part of that grassroots piece there. And then also the socialist piece too. And I saw Sister Tasha's hand up here. Now.
Yeah. So what I want to say about the socialist piece is that I do try to show what Harrison did differently, because he wasn't the first black socialist, right? Before Harrison, there were people like Reverend George Slater, Reverend George Washington Woodbey, and his wife, Annie Woodbey, who was also a thinker and an activist in her own right as a socialist. And before them, there was Peter Clark, right, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Nikki Taylor, right here at Howard University, has a wonderful book about Peter Clark, as a pioneering black socialist. What's different about them is they're all coming from a Christian frame. They're black socialists, but they're churchgoers. Harrison secularized the black socialist tradition, right? So when we're thinking about black Marxism specifically, we can think of Harrison as a kind of trailblazing black Marxist, because a lot of the black socialist figures after him were also secular, right? Or not necessarily coming to socialism from a Christian point of view. The second part of your question, though, was about, remind me again, what was the other?
Sterling Stuckey.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so, one of the fascinating things about Harrison is that he does a deep study of the Civil War and Reconstruction. One of my favorite quotes from Harrison, and this foreshadows what Du Bois would write about in Black Reconstruction. And in fact, in 1908, Harrison is teaching a course in Black history at the White Rose Home for colored girls that Francis Reynolds Keyser was the director of. And he teaches a course in Reconstruction, and he gives his notes to his friend Charles Burroughs, who would become the husband of Williana Burroughs, one of the first black women in the Communist Party. And Charles Burroughs gives his notes to W.E.B. Du Bois, because Harrison knew that Charles knew Du Bois. And the very next year, I believe it's 1909 or 1910, Du Bois gives his very first address at the American Historical Association on Black Reconstruction. So Harrison, I think, helped nudge Du Bois towards what becomes one of his, magnum opus works in Black Reconstruction. But what Harrison said about the Civil War, one of my favorite quotes, and you can hear Du Bois echoing this later in Black Reconstruction. Harrison said, "The Negro didn't save the nation. The nation didn't save the Negro saved the nation." And so when you're thinking about the general strike thesis, right, of Du Bois, this idea that the enslaved themselves actually crippled the South and joined, the Union Army, and that was the decisive blow against the Confederacy, right? You can see that idea, how concise Harrison is able to be with language to communicate a very sophisticated thing in a concise way, right? Because the mythology was that the nation had saved the Negro, that Abraham Lincoln was the great emancipator, right? Not that the Negro had saved the nation, that the enslaved had actually, saved the Union by their action and their self-emancipation. So I don't know if that directly answers the question, but certainly Harrison was very keen on history and on learning the lessons of history and reinterpreting history from a black angle of vision in ways that would only come to fruition later in some of the works like Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, as one example.
We'll talk more.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you so much. This was such an illuminating conversation. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I also wanted to thank Dr. E.L.A. and you for setting the beautiful tone, too, with the libation. That was wonderful to ground us. I wanted to ask you about the motivation to even do this work after having these 2 biographies. Is the focus of your work, how do you distinguish your work from the 2 biographies that already exist with the blind spots that you see there? I appreciate that you give, honor to it, but I'm just curious because I haven't read the books yet, and wonder if the focus of your work then is on the Black radicalism part, and just to hear you talk about your book in relation to the other 2 biographies.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Jeff Perry wrote a 2-volume biography, which is nearly 1,200 pages, not including footnotes. So it's meticulous and detailed almost to a fault. In fact, I think most people would, the general reader is not likely to actually get through both volumes, and I wouldn't blame them. It's great for like a researcher or a scholar like me because I was able to use that 2-volume work like a reference work almost. But the analogy that I use in the book is like if Perry is focused on the tree itself and every little, leaf on the tree and every branch on the tree and every piece of bark that's sticking out of the tree, I'm trying to look at the tree in its forest, right? In its context. What are the larger ecosystems in which that tree took root, and how, and what did that mean? And so, so that's one thing. The other thing is that being a single volume work, it's more punchy. It's like, here are the key themes that I think Harrison has to teach or has to offer us. And also, it's not just, I cover some themes that Perry doesn't get into at all, like free love, for example. Like Perry makes mention that, oh yeah, Harrison, spoke about free love and supported, access to birth control, but he doesn't go into it at all. He doesn't really go in depth and look at, well, what were the dimensions of Harrison's free love politics. But it's also a matter of perspective, right? I mean, let's be honest, Perry was an Irish-American socialist, so he's most interested in Harrison's kind of race and class politics in the way that you might expect from, a European-American socialist. I'm coming at Harrison from a Black and an African angle of vision, and so I'm much more interested in questions of Garvey and Garveyism, for example, or Harrison's African, his identity as an untamed, untamable African, right? I have a whole chapter that I go into Harrison's African politics, his humility, his analysis of ancient African civilizations, right, and all the study that he was doing with people like Schomburg and John E. Bruce, the Negro Society for Historical Research. He was in touch with people like Drusilla Dungy Houston, William Leo Hansberry, Carter G. Woodson, like that whole generation of Black folks who were sometimes in, but mostly out of the academy and forging their own institutions for Black study, right, and things of that nature. So yeah, my book is very different from Perry in that sense. It's different in terms of the content that I cover and the areas I go into that Perry never touched, and also the perspective that the angle of vision that I bring to Harrison as deliberately, decidedly, and unapologetically Black and African. That might be a good time for us to,
Well, thank you.
to wrap it up. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, if y'all want, if you want me to sign your copy, please get one and bring it to me. I'll be happy to do that. Thank you again for everybody coming out. And by the way, I'm speaking on Sunday at Busboys and Poets, 14th and V. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell people.